Welcome to this edition of SAU Magazine, a weekly program featuring news, profiles, sports, commentary, interviews, and special events, all coming to you from the campus of Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.
Adrienne Lawton.
And I'm Amanda Black. With us today is a very special guest, Blanche Lincoln, the Democratic candidate to replace retiring U.S. Senator Dale Bumpers. Miss Lincoln made history in 1992 when she became the first woman to represent Arkansas's 1st congressional district, and now she's campaigning to become the first woman to represent the state since Hattie Caraway in 1930s. Welcome, Miss Lincoln.
Welcome. Thank you. I'm pleased to be here today.
Well, Miss Lincoln, it seems that whenever you become a candidate, the media frenzy begins and you receive national media attention. And does this help you in any way, or does it make you look like a Washington insider who's got the media wrapped around your finger?
Oh, hardly. Well, I think it is of some help. Hopefully it's positive, and most of the things that we've seen on the national level have been positive about our race here in Arkansas. I think it gives people a sense of pride to know that not only that we're highlighting the ideas of what women have to offer in public service, but the fact that we can offer them in a very pleasant and ladylike way. I think that there is some difference truly of being a woman in public service and running for public office in the South than it is in the North, and certainly in other parts and geographical areas of the country. So maybe I'm a little bit of a novelty in many senses. First of all, being a young mother and running for public office. I was the youngest woman member of the United States Congress when I served in Congress for the 2 terms. So that was a little bit of a novelty in itself. Oftentimes I would walk onto the elevator, and the elevator was for members only, and they would tug at me and say, "This is for members only, not staff." And I said, "I'm not staff. I promise you I'm a member." So I think it's just kind of basically the nation being curious and inquisitive about the way that history is kind of unfolding and changing, seeing more and more women involved in public service and in elected positions, and also seeing young women. So I think that's some of what the national attention is about.
Well, we mentioned that you would be the first one since 1932, since Hattie Caraway represented the state. Is that going to be an obstacle, you think, as you're campaigning throughout the state? Do people say, "Oh, and where's your little husband?" Or is it going to be something that's not an obstacle at all?
No, I have found that the people of Arkansas are very interested in having someone that's a hard worker, someone that believes in the same Arkansas values that they hold, someone who's going to be willing to pull themselves up to the table and fight on behalf of the issues that are important to Arkansans, and who does have family as a priority, and I certainly do. There's a lot of working mothers out there who have jobs that would probably be far more difficult and time-consuming than being a United States Senator would be. So I think it's very important for people to look at the individual. And I have found that in most instances where I visit with people, I ask them for their support and for their vote. They very much are more interested in who I am, what I have to offer, my willingness to work hard, to fight hard on behalf of the issues of Arkansas and what's important to their everyday lives, and more importantly, the manner and the values with which I take those issues and that fight to Washington. So I really don't find that at all.
Mrs. Lincoln, speaking of issues, how would you reform the welfare system?
Well, I was one of the originals who worked on welfare reform in Washington as it was coming down the pike in the early 90s. When I went to Washington in 1992, we started the debate in 93 and actually produced a welfare reform bill, which is a lot of what the states are now trying to implement. We tried to put a balance, basically, of returning some of the responsibility to the states and giving the states the flexibility that they needed to implement welfare reform programs that were really tailored to each state, as opposed to trying to ask each state to have a one-size-fits-all solution coming down from the federal government, giving them the flexibility to be able to put into place programs and reforms that fit their states. But we also needed to look for national guidelines to make sure that we were getting the most efficient and effective use of our federal dollars in some of those programs. I've been a staunch supporter of welfare reform, making sure that those dollars are spent well, that we do have responsibility as a part of the guidelines in terms of benefits to individuals, and making sure that these programs and the ideas of what welfare is in this nation is really a safety net as opposed to a hammock or a way of life. If you want to talk about visuals, I think it's very, very important that we do reinstitute the ideas of independence and self-responsibility, but along with that, we've got to combine it with training and making sure that we're giving people skills so that they can be self-sufficient. So I've worked hard on welfare reform and will continue to work hard on welfare reform to make sure that the welfare reform programs that we've started with, we can continue to implement the things that we haven't been able to accomplish through those welfare reform programs. I'll continue to work hard on so that we'll see further development in newer welfare reform packages that we might need in order to achieve the goals of making sure that people can be independent, that they can find jobs, and they can be self-sufficient in their own without having to depend on government for a way of life.
As we talk about reforms, one thing that's made the news and reports show that this particular race that you're involved with could be the state's most expensive in history. And campaign finance reform is definitely something that we've been reading about in the news. What's your vision about that? Are campaigns too expensive, and how are you combating that? And what are your views on campaign finance reform?
Campaigns are far too expensive. They're far too expensive for candidates because we're the ones that have to raise the money to run them. But they're also far too expensive, I think, in order to keep the American people's focus on what campaigns are really about, and that's electing public servants. I think basically a lot of the cynicism that we have seen develop in this nation over the political arena has basically stemmed from the fact that people find these campaigns that are millions and millions of dollars. They don't find them trustworthy. They don't. It's not what it's supposed to be about. And I think that there are a lot of different things that we can do. I've already supported campaign finance reform from the 4 years that I served in the United States Congress. I've already voted for those packages, and am certainly willing to do that again. I don't hesitate to say that I am fine with the elimination of soft money. I think we can certainly minimize or cut back the caps in terms of personal contributions as well as PAC contributions. But I think it's important for people to recognize that PAC money, the Political Action Committee monies that come from different industry groups, is probably the most heavily regulated and reported form of campaign contribution that there is. That it, in fact, was a reform from corporate contributions. So there's an awful lot that we can do in those arenas. But I think we also have to look at how we can make campaigns more accessible. And we also have to make them more fair. One of the issues that's really unbelievable to me is the amount of independent expenditure that's out there without any reporting requirement at all. Any type of a independent group can come into an election, into any campaign, spend as much money as they want with any message that they want against any of the candidates, and not even have to report who they are, who their supporters are, where their money comes from. There's virtually no accountability in that, and I think that's completely unfair.
You have emphasized running a positive campaign. With that in mind, what are some of the positive comments that you can say about Faye Bozeman?
Well, I think he's a very pleasant person. The things that I have tried to point out to other people about my opponent and myself are the differences in our views on issues. A lot of those differences stem from some very important issues to me and some issues that I think are very important to the people of Arkansas. Social Security being one. I think that Social Security is a promise that was made to the American people over 60 years ago. And roughly 30 years ago, we saw the Social Security Trust Fund being used, leveraged against the debt to mask the amount of the debt, but also being used to pay for programs it was never intended to support. Now is the time. We're seeing more and more people who are dependent on Social Security for their well-being in their retirement years, and it's absolutely essential that we put budget surplus monies back into the solvency of Social Security, buying down the debt so that we can make Social Security Trust Fund more solvent. I've been a huge supporter of taking the trust fund offline of the general revenue of the Treasury. My opponent wants to completely privatize Social Security, and I think that's very risky. I think it puts the resources of many individuals, elderly individuals in this country who have put into Social Security over the years, it puts them at the risky consequences of a volatile market. I mean, if you look at just what happened in the stock market recently, the ups and downs, it's very difficult when you put the entire savings and the stability of the Social Security Trust Fund into that risky of a situation. Education's another good example. My opponent supports eliminating the Department of Education. I don't hesitate to say that there's not a single government agency out there that we can't make better. And I want to work hard to make them better, to make them the best that they can be. But the fact is, you know, you eliminate the Department of Education, you eliminate 40,000 Pell Grants in the state of Arkansas to students who want to go to universities like SAU. You eliminate $4.5 million in dollars for Goals 2000. You also eliminate the direct student loan programs that come through the Department of Education. It's vital that we have a national entity there that's going to be setting goals and helping us to reach goals through education.
Well, since we're here on SAU's campus, obviously higher education is a topic of great concern to the people here in the community and the students alike. What is your vision for working with the Department of Education, perhaps to make it better, or perhaps to increase that number from 40,000 Pell Grants in Arkansas to 50,000?
We did see some increase in those things. One of the things that I fought for when I was in Congress, there was an initiative by the Republican leadership my second term in Congress to eliminate the Department of Education and eliminate most of the student funding out there. I fought very hard against that effort, and actually we saw some increases in some of our student funding, both through Pell Grants and through direct loans, which I think is very important. I think giving the opportunity of higher education to as many people as possible and to as many people who want to take advantage of it is absolutely critical in this world. We're talking about a world that has become a much smaller place. We're talking about our individuals and our citizens having to compete with the technology and the educated capabilities of people across the world. And it is absolutely to our advantage, to our nation's advantage, to the well-being of our families in this country to make sure that as many individuals who want to take advantage of higher education have access to it. And I'll continue to work hard on behalf of that. I went to college on a student loan, and I know how important it is.
Well, we know a subject that's been discussed is empowering teachers. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means an awful lot. I think education has been a huge topic for me. I'm a product of the public schools in Arkansas, as is my husband. And now that we have children, we're even more enthusiastic about education and what it's going to mean for our children. And I think it's absolutely critical that we all as a community recognize that building on each and every child's opportunity for education benefits everyone. There's a host of things that I would like to see happening in terms of education. I'd like to see better teacher pay. The fact is other than their family, children are affected more in their life by their teachers than anybody else. It's going to be important that we give teachers the resources to be the best that they can be. Smaller classroom size, a better ratio of student to teacher in terms of making sure that teachers have the capability to be able to deal with children one-on-one, and they're not dealing with 40 children in a classroom per teacher, but that they've got a much better ratio. Buildings, school buildings. It's unbelievable the deterioration we're seeing in our public school facilities and buildings across this state and across this nation. Teachers can't teach in classrooms where they don't have the physical surroundings. If there's leaks in the ceilings, if they don't have the equipment, if they don't have the technology's phenomenal now. It's absolutely essential that we've got up-to-date, state-of-the-art buildings and equipment that are safe and usable. And national minimum standards, I think that's going to be very important. It's a very transient world right now. I have a niece that went through, by the time she finished high school, I think she'd been through 4 different school districts. And it's critical in 2 different states that we've got some minimum standards of what we're trying to reach so that all children, whether you're in a metropolitan area or a rural area in one state or another, but that you're looking at some minimum standards and some goals of what we want our children to reach.
SAU Magazine is a production of broadcast journalism students in the Department of Theater and Mass Communication at Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.